Okay. Today I want to talk about the topic of rationality here in our philosophy of mind class. And it's a metaphysical topic. I want to go slowly and sort of stop to smell the roses. I like this topic. It's one of the chapters in my book because I think that it's a problem in philosophy of mind that I think it's the neglected third problem in philosophy of mind. So the ones, and we talked about mental representation. Of course, that's the one that I want to spend, that we do spend a lot of time on. And then, and the problem of consciousness. The problem of mental representation is a metaphysical problem. The problem of consciousness, phenomenal experience, is a metaphysical problem. And we deal with those two, or I deal with those two in other videos and other places here in all of this. But there's also another metaphysical problem, which is the problem of rationality. Now, unlike, I think, the problem of mental representation, the problem of mental representation has to do, of course, with everything, with linguistics, with our functional models of the nervous system, with all kinds of things. So the soundness or lack thereof, or whatever questions we might ask theoretically about representational theory of mind, is clearly relevant for a lot of things besides philosophy, just any area of cognitive science that you could mention, really. And it is very central and completely vascular, this representational notion. So, that one doesn't need any introduction. But the problem of rationality isn't it's a real more old-fashioned metaphysical problem. It's not necessarily one that the people at the Cognitive Science Conference are necessarily going to have to care about. I think anyone involved in cognitive science has to care about the issue of mental representation, and therefore they can be sort of made coerced to listen to reasonable and persuasive problems with that, because they must. But you don't necessarily have to be concerned about the problem of rationality. And I'll tell you what, the problem of rationality in my book is basically the metaphysical problem that Plato is talking about in his main metaphysical theories. Very philosophical topic, and a fun topic that way. So let's get to it. I want to share the screen first of all with what I thought was my really pretty Swift, even though I don't quite know how to front load them right. Title page, Rationality, a Metaphysical Problem for Naturalism. So let's look at our conceptual area here, what it is that you have to understand what I'm talking about in a fluent way. Just a couple different things. Obviously, we're going to talk about what rationality is. The next slide is going to talk about what metaphysics is, the study of different kinds of things that exist, roughly. And then naturalism. And naturalism, again, being the idea that we have a sort of monistic metaphysical attitude towards the cosmos, that we don't see a sort of dualistic cosmos. What are some examples other than philosophy of mind? Examples might be the question of the existence of God, say, or the existence of the afterlife. I don't have any particular axe to grind right now on that issue, but I bring it up because it's an example of a metaphysical issue that most people are familiar with, most people have thought about. Metaphysical, that's why I'm mentioning it, because the question is there something that exists that's different from the physical cosmos or isn't within the physical cosmos, and so on. What's another example? Another example might be value properties. So we say that some things are red and some things are green, and we say some things are big and some things are small. But we also say that some things are pretty and some things are plain, and we say that some things are good and some things are wrong. That is, we make both aesthetic and ethical judgments. Both of those are examples of value judgments. And so we say that there are these properties, these aesthetic and ethical properties that things have that look like they're not physical properties. So that's a metaphysical issue too. And so, and so philosophers then are interested, after all, in philosophy, religion, and theology. People get down on philosophers being atheistic. I don't know why. They're probably about half and half on that issue. But of all the people in the university, philosophers do talk about these things, after all. So there's that. And then there's also talk about values and the relationship of values to natural science and naturalism. So that's what we're talking about today. the relationship of rationality to naturalism, an attitude that we have that I would like to have, by the way. Ideologically, I'm quite sympathetic to naturalism, really. That is, I don't do ghosts and goblins, and I don't do angels and demons, and I sort of think there's a natural cosmos. I'm really into evolutionary biology. I think that when you die, you're dead, and so on and so on. I mean, so, but that makes the issue all the more interesting, because it looks to me as if we do have an interesting block to reduction. What does that mean, block to reduction? A block to taking some of our psychological talk and understanding it or analyzing it, translating it even maybe into some kind of physical talk. That's the idea. You've got the brain and the mind. So what's the relationship between the mind and the brain? And that's what philosophy of mind is all about. In this philosophical sense, really essentially a metaphysical question. So the goal today is just to understand then how it is that rationality is a metaphysical problem for naturalism. So there's three concepts. There's the concept of rationality, the concept of metaphysics, and a metaphysical problem, and the concept of naturalism. Metaphysical problem for naturalism. If you want to be a naturalist, it looks like rationality might pose a problem in sustaining a thoroughgoing naturalism about your analysis of the semantics of the psychological words. I mean, let me just let it all hang out there. I mean, so you've got words like belief or desire, or intention or suspicion. You've got these, we call these intentional terms. They are all characterized by having some content. You have a belief that something, you have a desire for something, a fear or a hope about something or the other. And that's why that issue of representation is so important as well. Okay, so let's carry on then, much as I loathe to leave behind the slide. All right, so let's talk about those concepts a little bit more, and then we can get a little further into it and make some points. Metaphysics, again, the study of types of existence or kinds of existence. So I gave you those other examples. And if that sounds kind of like a kind of philosophy that science supersedes, I would say, yeah, tally ho with that, except that makes it interesting when we find places where there are these blocks to naturalization and blocks to reduction. And that kind of conceptual analysis is what philosophy sort of is, and what one part of what philosophy is today. So, so God and angels, ethical and aesthetic properties are two examples I use. There are others. In philosophy of mind, the central concept is whether the mind can be defined in natural or material or physical. Let me step out and talk about that just for a second, give a little basic spiel here. So again, we're all about words and concepts. So you've got these three words. You've got materialism, you've got physicalism, and you've got naturalism. These three words they're all kind of little mini theories, right? These three isms are sort of little mini theories. That is materialism. So that'd be the theory that everything is matter. One problem with the theory, with saying, well, my theory is that everything is made out of matter these days, is that if we actually look at physics, which is very hard to understand, and I'm not fluent in it, but it certainly looks as if what they say about matter is a lot of very strange things. So that I don't understand. And so if you're telling me that you think that everything is matter, I'm just really not sure what you're buying with that, because it looks to me like the contemporary notion of matter is, kind of really strange and somewhat obscure to most people. So then you've got physicalism, saying everything is physical, and naturalism, saying everything is nature. And then there's this concept of nature, the cosmos is nature, right? A sort of Spinozistic idea, maybe. We'll think about what we're talking about today, the problem of rationality. And they all sort of mean the same thing. Materialism sounds the most Nazi, and naturalism sounds the most hippie. So I guess everybody will probably want to go with naturalism. My students certainly do. So, okay, fine. But as I say, there's a little bit of rhetoric involved in there. What you want to see is the underlying metaphysical concept, which really doesn't have to do with the adjective. It really has to do with the noun, which is monism. What we're talking about are varieties of monism. That's what we want. We want a thoroughgoing monism, and that means that our psychological language and concepts need to also be words and concepts that we can fit into this overall naturalistic, monistic, right? Everything is one kind of stuff. Or you could look at it as negative. Maybe we're reactionaries, and what we don't like is dualism. Okay, so we'll do whatever we have to do to stop that. That's okay, maybe so. And by the way, notice that you don't have to be someone committed to monism. You certainly don't have to be somebody committed to materialism. That strictly has to do with you and what you think is right and wrong. Philosophy is funny that way. I mean, you can't really learn the information. You have to learn the various options and the sort of possibility spaces, and then you have to kind of ask yourself what it is that you think about it. Well, anyway, so that's probably my cue to get back. So I start to rambling. All right, so monistic idea, yeah. And the last bullet point there, rationality, the property of being rational, if you will. Look at that thing over there. It's blue and it's round and it's rational. It's a property that it has. Okay, think about it like that. Rationality represents a problem for naturalism. Okay. So what do we want to take away from this today? Well, you want to just understand that. How is it that rationality is a metaphysical problem for naturalistic monism, right? That's all. I mean, then we're good. That's the goal. That's the project. Just to understand the issue. Okay. So let's define rationality. We're just being really good little philosophers today. So first of all, and again, let me step out of this for a second. I want to talk about the rationality assumption. So somebody gets up and leaves, and I say, how come he got up and left? And you say, because he was thirsty. And so we can unpack that. That's an intentional description and explanation. You just did some psychology. When I talk about psychology, by the way, that's all I mean. I just mean, folk psychology. I just mean talking about people, ourselves and others in terms of our beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, suspicions, intentions, et cetera, intentional states. And what we're doing is analyzing just what exactly it is that these intentional states are. So somebody gets up and leaves the room, and I say, what's that? And you say, well, he was thirsty. And that unpacks. It unpacks into what you're saying is he had a desire for water, and he had a belief that the water fountain was down the hall, in which case, all other things being equal, a rational person would form an intention to go down the hall, as he did. And that's what you just told me when you said, it's thirsty. Yeah. So, but notice something. It has to be that you, the person who's talking to me, the listener who's listening to you, trying to understand your psychological explanation, and our subject, him, the guy who just left, that we're making a psychological description of, it has to be that all three of us, at a minimum, understand the logical relationships between those propositions. Which ones? I want some water. The water is down the hall. Right? You have to see how they relate to each other. It's a logical relationship. And notice how physical objects don't look like they have logical relationships. Looks like they may have causal relationships and spatio-temporal relationships and so on, but it doesn't look like they have logical relationships at all. As part of the metaphysical problem of mind that we're talking about here. So, okay. So let's go back to our slides. That's what I do when I forget what the hell I'm talking about. All right, so that's the rationality assumption. Now, notice that these logical relationships, I mean, there's a question about the relationship between language and mind, and I guess another thing that I talk about in other places. But after all, I want the meat's on the other side of the fence, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're just talking about recognizing basic logical relationships. Now, you could have a more stringent definition. Noam Chomsky, who's very protective of the idea of rationality, wants to have a very strict definition. He says a being that can formalize math and logic he considers rational. It's a pretty strict definition. But there is something there that we want to understand, formalizing, that is. So 2 + 2 = 4 is a formalization. it's about what? It's about any two pairs of elephants, or any two pairs of cupcakes, or any two pairs of galaxies. It's about any two pairs. It's not about any two pairs of this or that in particular. That is, it's not about any physical thing in particular. It's transcendental. And so, again, that's going to be the problem. That is, it looks like, the mind has a sort of transcendental capacity. So what are we going to make of that? What's going on here? Well, something called supervenience. Now, supervenience, I'm going to talk about two rather notorious terms right now. I'm going to talk first about supervenience, and then I'm going to talk about functionalism. At this point in mixed philosophical company, that is, with various different philosophers interested in various things, people will start to roll their eyes. There are some common misunderstandings, and I don't mean to yammer on about supervenience and functionalism. My intention is here to get to the point and inform anybody who needs it or wants it. But look, supervenience isn't a theory. It's not a theory of mind. It doesn't solve any problems. Supervenience actually is a problem, and it's not a problem that's unique to mind at all. For example, you could take a physical object like a painting, and you could talk about its physical properties. It was 4x4 and made out of wood and weighed 8 pounds, and it was green and yellow. And you could also talk about its aesthetic property, say that it was a beautiful object. But obviously, having those physical properties I just listed aren't necessary for something to be a beautiful object, nor is being 4x4 and wood and so on even sufficient to be a beautiful object. It's the rare wooden 4x4 yellow and red thingy that's beautiful, right? So, so there are supervenient properties all over the place, and we're going to talk about, well, we're talking about what supervenient property, what it means to say that something's supervenient. The real thing, though, is that it's mathematics that are supervenient. So the basic one is geometrical properties. This is the right way to understand what Plato's talking about. So say you have the set of all circular objects. They're all circular, and that's what makes them all members of the set. What do they have in common? They have in common a mathematical property that is sort of Euclidean definition of a circle. They've got that in their form. Or something, but what one of them is made out of rock, and one of them is made out of bronze, and one of them is made out of ceramics, and one of them is made out of bone. So obviously these micro properties of these contingent physical substances don't have anything to do with the property of circularity. That is to say, again, they're neither necessary nor sufficient. You don't have to be bone, and being bone ain't enough to be circular. How can we grasp the relationship a little better? Think about that painting again. The painting looks as if it is beautiful in virtue of these physical properties that it has, even though that list of physical properties in no way gives us any kind of formula for how it achieves its beauty. But if I slash the painting or threw mustard on it or burned it, that would change the aesthetic property. No change in physical property without a change in supervenient property. And so we can think about this in terms of, say, there's electrochemical changes going on inside your nervous system, and we're talking about some kind of relationship that those physical processes have to some kind of mental process that you're experiencing, say, some intentional states that you're in. And so then we can capture that, right? I mean, it certainly is the fact that you have the brain doing the thing that it's doing, that you're in the intentional states that you're in. Certainly, just as it certainly is the fact that the painting is a beautiful painting because it's 4x4 and wood and green and yellow. So everything is a physical thing of some kind or the other, and it is by virtue of the physical properties that the supervenient property is achieved. It's just that particular object, here's the right way. Let me step out and see if I can do this. I want to give you sort of a formal definition, I think, of the problem of rationality. I think it goes something like this. I think the problem is that we do not have any physical criteria that we can use to establish the extension of the set of all rational beings. Okay, what does that mean? So you've got the set of all rational beings, all the rational beings that exist. You, me, Flipper the dolphin, the coneheads on Remulax, okay? All the rational beings, and we're in that set of rational beings. But it looks as if we don't have any physical criteria that fix the extension of the set. That is, the physical properties that are necessary and sufficient such that any being that has those is a rational being, and any being that doesn't have those physical properties is not a rational being. We don't have that. That's the metaphysical problem. Okay, so let me get back then to the Slido Leos. Okay, so finally then, think of this. You've got me, you've got My Favorite Martian, the alien from outer space, us two. You've got Flipper the dolphin, and you've got Data, the android, from Star Trek, The Next Generation. You got us four, me, the Martian, dolphin, and the android. And we all believe that the fish are in the barrel, and we all desire to be the first to get the fish. It's, and farce ensues. But the point is that it looks like we're all four going to come under the same intentional descriptions if we're all sort of equal to each other rationally. Or even if we're not. I mean, that is to say, we're all going to come under belief, desire, description, intentional description. But we're not made out of the same stuff. We don't, the space aliens, right? We don't even know what they're made out of. We don't know if they're alive or dead. We don't know if they're made out of parts or they're the same stuff all the way through, like butter, right? Doesn't matter, see, which is also important. Okay. So that's the problem, right? The problem is that it looks like rationality is a supervenient property. It looks like there's all kinds of different things that are rational. So this raises, I mean, this does, I guess, actually raise some problems for cognitive science research. I mean, in as much as you've got sort of the wetware, the hardware people digging the tunnel from the human being towards understanding rationality, and then you've got sort of the software people, the people doing linguistics and computer science and logic and so on, digging the tunnel from the other end, right? And so what we want in, say, computer science is to have a cognitive psychology, which is in functional terms. That's what I'm going to talk about now, functionalism. Again, functionalism isn't really a theory of mind either. I tend to include it along with, when I'm doing dualism and behaviorism and identity theory, and then ending up with functionalism. But functionalism really is sort of a method for doing theory of mind rather than actually a theory of mind itself. All functionalism is saying that you're going to give your psychological description in functional terms rather than physical terms. What's the difference between a physical description and a functional description? Well, let's take an ordinary object like a doorstop, for example. Now, a physical description of a doorstop might be that it's a little brown rubber wedgy thing about yay big, and it says Doorstop Company, Cleveland, Ohio on the side. And you get them for 69 cents in this little wire basket down at Ferreteria Gonzalez. Okay, and that would be it's got little treads on the bottom so it doesn't slip. That's a physical description of the object. But a functional description is going to abstract away from the object and its physical properties altogether. And it's going to say anything that holds the door, rock, phone book, me, that doesn't matter. And again, you can see the appeal if you want to do computer science, that is, if you want to instantiate cognitive properties and artifacts, then definitely what you want is to understand that what you need to achieve is functional equivalence. The designer says they need it to do this, and they send it down to the engineer, but the engineer can use any kind of materials and do it any way that it can be done. The designer is working functionally. It's, I need something that does this. The engineer is the one who says, okay, well, this is something that can do that. That's the difference. So the difference between, again, just to sum up there, the difference between a functional description of something and a physical description of something. So notice that so one thing that you do want, after all, is a functional description of, for example, say the human nervous system. What exactly does it do? How exactly does it function? And then you have functional equivalent things. Okay, that's the idea. So functionalism says that the intentional state is equivalent to any physical thing that performs the proper function, essentially. So functionalism is non-reductive materialism. Now, functionalism doesn't necessarily have to be even materialism. I mean, think of Ghostbusters. If Casper, the friendly ghost, comes around and he's rational and he's made out of ectoplasmic reticulum and it's not a physical thing, then I guess he's functionally equivalent too. I mean, that could be part of the originally advertising for the appeal of functionalism, is that in fact it is not necessarily a kind of materialism, but practically speaking, in the community, functionalism is the flag of non-reductive materialism. Materialism, that is, every rational being is a physical being, a physical critter or thing of some sort or the other, but non-reductive in the sense that, but it's not a Martian or a human necessarily, or an orang or a Remulaxian. It's just any being that has these functional properties. And that's how rationality is a block to naturalizing psychology. So that's all really pretty essential stuff to understand. As I say, you'll get a pushback sometimes. If you want to talk about these ideas, you need to make sure the people you're talking to already understand what functionalism and supervenience refer to. They don't refer to any theories of mind. Functionalism is a particular kind of description, and supervenience is actually a metaphysical problem. It's actually a problem. That there are a problem for naturalists, that there are supervenient things all around that look like they're multiply realizable. But what is that really all about? That's really all about, I think that's really all about mathematics. I think it's really all about the metaphysics of mathematics. And so if I get any result in my own personal research about rationality, it would be that I think that the problem of rationality is not actually a metaphysical problem properly unique to the metaphysics of mind. I think that it's actually a general problem about the form-matter distinction a la Plato. And if that's true, that is a little result for the philosophy of mind, because it just showed just that what you really have here is a general metaphysical problem and not a problem that's particular to the concept of mind. I've got my, my pen here, and my pen is round, so it's got a geometrical property. Now, the property of roundness doesn't come to be or pass away. So the formal part of my pen doesn't come to be or pass away. So that's what Plato means by its soul or its form. There's only one, right? The formal soul. And so metaphysically, then on that view, I'm not actually distinct from the pen. The pen and I both participate in immortal form, it to the extent that it's circular and me to the extent that I'm rational. And that is a good result, because that shows that, again, and I'll say it one more time, that you don't have a metaphysical problem that's particular to the philosophy of mind, I think. Plato understands this, Kant gets this wrong. Modern physics understands this. So just to sum up, but I don't want to be a dualist. I don't want dualism, but I'm just trying to show you how rationality is a problem for monism. And so think of this. You've got the question, why does something exist rather than nothing? Now, maybe there's no answer to the question why something exists rather than nothing. Might just be that it does. Although I'm interested in the modal status of that. It looks to me like failsafe is contingent, but that's another question. But it looks as if you could have had a sort of oatmeal universe that didn't, a sort of plasma chaotic universe that didn't have any kind of order at all. Now there's a technical argument, both in theoretical physics and also, interestingly, in theoretical biology and evolutionary biology, about whether you can start from a chaotic state and then start to get some kind of iteration happening. And from that, you get into fractals and crystals. And from that, you get, Albert Einstein. I mean, that's the idea. I say that flippantly, but it's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. Again, thinking about philosophy of mind, remember what I just said, I would say it might be that the cosmologists tell us someday that they have some sort of definitive proof that the universe started out organized or that the universe started out chaotic. Okay. But it doesn't matter to what I'm saying right now. That's not actually relevant, because my point is just whatever the case may be, the property of rationality is just one out of many of these formal properties. We are formally organized beings, just like all the other beings in the universe. This is a formally organized universe. And this is why Kant is such a disaster on my view. That's a big part of my shtick you're getting there. But anyway, getting back to, then just to finish up again now on that fourth bullet point there on the slide. So you've got this issue, why is there something rather than nothing? And maybe there's no answer to that. But there's another question, maybe there's another question, which is, why is the something formally organized? It looks like it doesn't have to be formally organized. That too looks like it's contingent. So if there are two existential questions, what am I doing here? I'm trying to boil the dualism down to the thinnest dualistic gruel I can get. I don't like dualism. So how does it boil down? I think it sort of boils down to this. Maybe the fact that this cosmos is a formally organized one, such that things in it are intelligible, members of sets. Plato's on top of all this. Maybe that's just another contingency, a further existential question that has no answer. And so, if you think that's dualism, then maybe that's dualism. That's kind of the best that I can do, That's, I think that's kind of, but I think that the problem of rationality and philosophy of mind, as I say, is a subset of that. So anyway, I think a very interesting issue, and one that illustrates nicely, I think, that as much as we might all like to be naturalists, we might, and we don't all have to be, and I know not all my students want to be naturalists by any means, but to the extent that we do, that doesn't mean that there aren't any more problems. It doesn't mean that full naturalism is achieved. Among other problems, we've got the problem of rationality and the larger problem of the metaphysics of mathematics. Alrighty then, is that it? Yeah, that's it. Okay then. So that's the problem of rationality. I'm also going to give you that chapter that I was talking about if you're in the class to read. And so again, a nice moving forward. I just kind of realized today that was what I had to do, was this thing on this next unit on rationality. And now I think we've done enough with mental representation and rationality that we can go on to talk about consciousness, which is a really interesting topic that we really haven't talked about that much this semester. All right, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.